exposing the hate and exploring the love. This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
Hola, this is Sienna inviting you to join me tonight as we navigate through the seen and the unseen, explore external and internal realities, expose on-world and off-world agendas, discover a path to joy and freedom. Now, join me as we illuminate the Shadowland and reclaim our birthright as free and sovereign beings. Hello everyone, hola, hola, hola. This is Sienna and we are here with a incredible new friend from down under, from Australia. And his name is Bood Hickson, and he is from the Beyond community. Welcome to the show, Bood.
Thank you, Sienna. It's Bood as in good, believe it or not.
Okay, I knew I was massacring that. Thank you for correcting me on that. Let me just give a little bit of a rundown of who I'm discovering you to be. This is an absolutely extraordinary human being. I asked for his bio, and he sent me an absolute novel of things that he has dived way deep into, and been a world server on so many levels, everything from biodynamics, permaculture, land management, all kinds of computer and science technology, and holistic management, community facilitation, mediation, reconciliation, conservation, healing. And he has a community, 200 acres, is that, near Queensland. I want you to tell us about it. It sounds absolutely extraordinary, and I am very honored to have you on the show tonight, because I sense that over your life you have gathered a great deal of wisdom through diving in and being a part of solution on this planet in terms of many, many things. So welcome to the show, and I want to start with your flower petal analogy, and just turn it over to you, because I know that one of your dear topics is governance, but it's a very holistic concept. So just take it as you wish.
Thank you, Sienna. Look, it's been great talking to you in the last couple of weeks, and I'm looking forward to today's program and working after this one as well. Now, the flower petal was the motive that we used, we developed here at the community over the last few years, because it became very apparent that we really needed to define what was community and what wasn't. Not in the sense that we were, wanting to build fences, but if we were going to put efforts towards collective goals, then we really had to be clear about the goals, so that we didn't keep drifting off and doing our stuff that wasn't necessarily what the whole community felt was the shared stuff. So to do this, I sort of drew this picture of the flower with the notion that the stem was the community. That was what sort of actually brought us together. That was the place as such. And then just a fairly conventional kind of flower with the middle stamen as such, and that represented the governance. And the governance is this pet topic of mine, excuse me, which is really about how we come together, and bring all these bits that we do. And the petals, well, there are a number of them, and we keep changing the names of them, which is fine. But they're basically, at the moment, it fits with the charges anagram. So there is community, and the community group is really looking at at the emotional welfare and of the organisation. How can we grow? What are our goals? Keeping those things out there and fun and engaging. We had health, which was so much the reason why we came to community. We have an organic farm here. So health, started with everything from us managing our beautiful garden here. It's about 200 square meters, to getting out there, to harvesting the herbs and the greens to go in our salads, right through to the various health programs that we ran here. And helping people understand their purpose and dealing with their crisis and dilemmas. A was for administration, because we all have the mundane things, the less sexy things that we have to deal with, the servicing of the vehicles, the paying the bills that we need to acknowledge. R was for recreation. Now, recreation is a very big domain, so this includes arts, going bushwalking, lots and lots of things within the recreation, being creative as well as recuperating. G was governance. E was for enterprise. We realise that it's really important, because we still live in the world of money, that we need to have a means of engaging. So we can take our talents and hopefully turn them into collective enterprises. And S is also very important, because S is for shelter. And shelter is a really critical part of community. And it's obviously very different in different places, but required. So basically all those parts came together to explain sort of what was in our community as opposed to what was out. If someone was into model trains, and that was fine. No one was saying they couldn't be, but it didn't constitute, the community focus as such. And that helped us. And at our meetings, we would use this model so that we could actually focus on those key areas to keep us moving through our meetings, so that it was sort of orientated towards what we had already agreed.
Well, it's interesting that you say all of that, because we're at a point now where people are feeling the need to exit in varying degrees what we call the artificial construct, or this dark control grid, the slave state. We talk a lot about this on Truth Frequency, and certainly our audience is very well aware and growing more and more of the level of heartless control and domination and vampirization of their life force, and the whole slave and lack of sovereignty reality. And it's a painful thing to wake up to, but more and more people are waking up to this and are fairly helpless and clueless about how one creates anything different, and how one creates something that's non-hierarchical. And I know a lot of the people that are ready to exit are really sick of authority figures, and they're sick of people telling them what to do and suppressing them, and they want to be free and they want to be sovereign. But this is a process that is very interesting, in that a lot of communities end up shooting themselves in the foot, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, in that they throw out the individual distinctions, the talents, and the skills of each individual member to let a person shine in the area where they are organically talented in. It levels the playing field so that the game becomes dysfunctional. And I hear partly what you're saying is that you're sensing that there's a structure, but perhaps more of an organic structure, but it does need to be honored, that there's certain agreements or certain structures, and I want to hear more about this governance, that you've come to understand are essential for a new level of cooperation, because we're talking about a new humanity, aren't we? We're talking about the transformation out of a dark and toxic and abusive and cruel in many ways, an inhuman agenda, and birthing something that is not any of those things. And as we have been talking about in some of our conversations, we're in a bridging mode. We're exiting. We wish to exit to some extent within ourselves, hopefully first, and then in our relationships, and then in our entire life, in our creations, in our business, in our families, in our communities, in our cultures, in our spirituality, in everything, in our food, in our environment, everything. And as we said, there are massive amounts of ideas being birthed in this new awareness, and they are largely really fantastic ideas. But we are a herd of very wounded animals that have been a part of this slave state, either as the victims or as the perpetrators, or sometimes a bit of both. And so we can't, and this is why I'm really enjoying my conversation with you, is you seem to really have a very deep understanding of what can sabotage this process and what is needed to augment it. And I'm not trying to portray you as the next guru of community, because I know we're all learning and researching this together. But it's very interesting to me that you're talking about governance, and then you're talking about something that will maintain the emotional health at the same time. And I want to hear more about this governance and how it addresses all of this.
Okay. Like so many people with the good fortune that I've had, great family, opportunities that most people on the planet don't get to travel the world, explore interesting topics. And I jumped in the deep end, thinking, as a child of the 60s, that all we had to do was hold hands and the world was going to be a better place. I mean, it was pretty apparent to me as a kid that, that love was breaking out everywhere. What a shock, when I got into my teens and then university, that somehow the flower power and the hope just seemed to evaporate again. And as a result, I guess many of us from that era have been searching for that magic that we experienced as children. Mm-hmm. And so that gave us certainly a lot of momentum to explore a lot of topics. But the hard thing is going out there and doing it, and day after day, and taking stock of it, and knowing when we're not making progress. Because I think I see so many people who become cynical keep doing the same thing because they're not getting results. So I think I've been lucky enough that my impetuousness to run at walls and hit them hard was good in a way, because I ended up with so many bruises on my head that often I would have to literally sit down and think about it, as painful as that may have been. But on a lot of occasions I realized I had to have a cold shower, that I might have been doing good stuff and I might have meant well, and I might have even been acting well, but I wasn't really making any real difference, or at best, I was holding the ground, And I watched so many people get burnout fatigue, so there was always people exiting the front line, and there was a few of us there bravely trying to hold the wall up. So I guess out of that exercise, I was lucky enough to be able to take a cold shower and often let go of things, because I realized I really wasn't making a difference. At a personal level, I probably was feeling I was doing my thing, but at the bigger scale, no, I was, engaged in some battle that was doomed to failure. So part of that is, I guess, has kept leading me on, to try and find a battlefront where not only can I contribute, and I'm sorry to use the notion of war, but in some ways, we are in this war that we're unaware of, that you so beautifully described. But I want to be somewhere where we're making progress. Sometimes I think maybe I should go and join the Taliban. But the reality is that that it's hard to find that place where we can really be effective, and to some extent, that requires somehow moving beyond operating as an individual, which we're so conditioned to do, into somehow getting a collective effort mobilized. And so I've done that in a lot of different domains, maybe not as consciously as it sounds at this point in time, but the next exercise was really to get involved in group activities, community activities, and try and understand these dynamics, which have a habit of like the tides coming in and going out again, and that's okay. But through this and through the exercise of community, it's really been apparent to me that governance, as opposed to government, is very much, particularly in Australia, what we're really struggling with. And historically, I guess that makes sense in that when I grew up, we were told that, our grandfathers died in the Great War to give us the vote. And, this is the sacred truth, supposedly, that's put out there. Anyhow, I have a habit of not having a lot of respect for the so-called sacred truths. And it's become quite apparent to me that these people were butchered so that we lost our rights and responsibilities. The vote is something I'm not very proud of. I think it is an enslavement card, as you'd probably agree, Sienna.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That we're not voting on anything but two hands of the same beast.
Hear, hear. So, this sort of really got me to this point to realize, okay, that what this whole exercise is about us taking our rights and responsibilities back, And while in this government that's probably considered an act of sedition now under the laws that they've made, well, they're actually not laws, they're legislation. We've got to be really clear the difference between laws and legislation. But that this whole notion of governance is sort of, particularly in Australia, what we seem to be missing, because in my lifetime, people don't talk about this. It's not a debate. It's assumed that we're a democratic country and we've got a government, and that's the only way you can think about it. Even though most people are horrified by our government. We've just had a change of government here at the moment. Now the reason it changed was because people were so sick of the last mob. Well, I can tell you in the 4 months since the new mob got in, I haven't heard anyone say anything nice about them. And the so-called laws they're bringing in are horrifying, are actually breaking the law. In my state here, they've now brought a new law in that means that bikies can be, if you're a member of a bike gang, you've lost your legal rights. You're guilty until presumed innocent. And our judiciary's coming out in the radio saying, this is totally unconstitutional. But nothing's changing. We can see what's going on. So back to this point is that for me, what we really, to try and get this at a micro scale and at a community level where we can be influential players, hopefully for the right reasons, I had to really look at this notion of governance. And it's a little bit my preoccupation in community. And it's interesting that most other people in Australia don't really get it. I mean, as one of our community members said, he says, I don't believe in government, that's why I came here, And I said, yeah, well, I can understand the motivation, but it doesn't mean that this part of it, we can just ignore and hope someone else is going to do it, So it became really critical to me that, community wasn't simply about good people getting together. We've done that, that's not a problem. And good people getting together can have a lot of fun. And we have had a lot of fun here. We've had a lot of joy. We've done a lot of interesting things. But how do you keep good people together when the novelty has gone? How do you keep good people together when their own personal agendas don't seem to be met with as much as they might like, How do you keep good people together when there's novelty going on outside there that we'd all like to go and taste? So it kept becoming quite obvious to me that one of our challenges was that we had to somehow do this governance thing without it causing too much pain, because it's not an easy thing to do, within our group. And you know, that's what I guess I learnt, particularly in the last 3 years of community here. And to give you a little bit of insight, what our approach was that we would spend 1 hour a week having a community meeting, a governance meeting, okay? And the idea of the governance meeting, that's when we come together and, you know, we discuss the things that are going on, and while we've got everyone there, we, you know, basically get agreement to certain things that we're going forward. It doesn't mean that these conversations aren't going on outside that hour and that most of the solutions are being developed through the week as such. But the whole notion was that we would come together for an hour and just make sure we're all in the same place and dealing with things and putting things up that we required. And that sounds very easy. And then we had this, you know, we developed this model to make it more efficient. So we didn't spend all of our time wandering off on a particular issue, so that we could focus to the key elements of the community that we all agreed on. And so that was good. But what we then found was that if there were issues of grievance out at the moment, that they tended to sabotage our meetings. Once things became emotional in meetings, it was pretty obvious that the rest of the meeting was almost doomed, because the energy changes, the receptivity changes. So this is the normal way things are. So it wasn't something to be horrified about. What we had to do is to work out how we can refine our processes to give us better outcomes. And we came up with this idea of grumble pie, you know, so that the idea was that we could have a different day and a different meeting where we dealt with the negative stuff, you know, where, you know, it was fine to speak our truths, you know, that we were all ready for it as such, you know. And the whole idea of this was hopefully to deal with the stuff that could disrupt our you know, our more orderly, our more objective governance meeting. And
I'd be interested to know how those meetings went, because certainly you didn't just have everybody spewing out, or did, I mean, how did that, can you give us a little deeper look into how that worked?
Well, once again, it was over a meal. I mean, in community, we feel that sharing meals is very important, that you must meet. I mean, some communities are sort of semi-autonomous, you know, rural estates where, you know, there's the notion of community is fairly superficial, but we've always felt that we need to share meals. We are a community. We've got to come together. You know, now whether that's once a week or more, hopefully more regularly. But the grumble pie was once again over a meal. You know, because, you know, if things are really bad, you won't eat with people. So, you know, there was obviously a layer above that if things were getting really bad. But the grumble pie was in essence trying to deal with the small issues that could derail important meetings before they got to important meetings. And you know, they're often very trivial, but it just gave us an opportunity to talk things through. I think it was a bit of a green light when, as people, you know, we're sort of waiting for the right time to talk to Hayley about this matter. What this really did was make us really comfortable about whoever it was, and that it was a collective conversation. So it wasn't, you know, me versus Hayley or whoever, but the whole of us could sort of understand this dynamic, because this is the truth of reality. Different people have different kinds of relationships with different people. Different people bring up stuff for other people and not others, you know. So it was just an exercise of actually getting it out there and letting people get into it. And mostly it was really the grumble pies weren't a problem. The real problem was keeping the grumble pie still out of the governance meeting, you know. And I mean, there are a lot of reasons for this, but I'm going to go back a little bit because I think this will help give us more context. But
Okay, I would need to say that we have about 2.5 minutes till our first break. So just so you know our time frame here.
Okay. And I mentioned this to you, and then it'll lead us back into this when we come after the break. But I got really interested in intentional communities after I went to South America, and I was really struck by the difference between my Anglo-Saxon culture that was very time orientated. It almost appeared that we were worshipping the watch. And the Latinos, who culturally are very similar to where we've come from, Europe, who had a much more social orientation and who weren't preoccupied about being at places on time, but much more about having the right relationships with people they met on the way. So this is what got me involved in community, and I'm watching the clock here at Sienna. And when I came back, I set about trying to get some movement in this area in my region, and was fortunate that there were two other colleagues I'd been looking at a lot of sustainability issues with, land management issues with, who were both looking at governance and community. And as a result, the three of us got together with three different community ideas, all very different. But in 2006, I think we had about 5 or 6 community meetings, one at each of our respective communities, and then a number in other places exploring different things, but just really trying to get some conversation about community in this region. And that was really fascinating and led into the experiments here.
Well, I can't wait to hear about what happened after that. What an incredible, dedicated world server you've been all this time. We didn't know you before, but thank you for doing this work for all of us. Stay with us. I'm here with Bood Hickson, the Beyond Community. This is Illuminating the Shadowland. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. This is Sienna Leah, and you are at Illuminating the Shadowland. I'm here this evening with Bood Hickson of the Beyond Community, and we're having a fascinating discussion. There is so much depth to this topic, and I can feel that you have so much experience here. And we're just skimming the tip of the iceberg, as we say. But it's very interesting what you were just talking about, the difference in cultures. As I'm living in Ecuador, and I've lived in Latino countries for 16 years now. And the difference in values really does shift to the ground of being. The people are family oriented. They don't have a lot of things, and they probably, most of them, never will, but they're very rich in their smiles and their laughters and their hugs and their sharing of life and their beingness together. And we really have lost this a lot in Western culture.
Yeah, so that led me on this experiment when I got home with these other friends of mine who were looking at community. So it sort of gave us some motivation, some reference. And I was intrigued by the different models that we were looking at. Now, I won't go into names on the program, but one of the friends was really looking at an eco-village, a sort of a bigger style development with thousands of people, on the edge of a town. But, under the guise of a better model of living, both in terms of socially and environmentally. And another colleague was leading another community that actually existed here, but didn't actually have a formal home at this stage, was a virtual community. And they have spent a lot of time. They've recently bought a property. I'll get to that possibly later. But they were spending a lot of time developing the rules, which was really interesting that they actually sort of used that term. And the contrast in the way we did things became really fascinating. It was, we're all obviously new to this, interested, but our trajectories were coming from very different places. So the fact that we collaborated was really fantastic. And I guess that because we could see we were coming from such different places, by definition, we weren't really competing. And we were in this landscape where we all had a lot to learn just from engaging with each other. Now, this sort of development of the rules was, very confronting to me. And yet, I would get a lot of people, contact me and say, oh, we're interested in your community. Can you send us the rules? And I'd go, oh, yeah, the rules. Oh, well, that's easy. I can tell you them. The rules are, the rules shall be written in pencil. And, some people would get quite upset about this. And I'd say, well, look, I thought if we're developing community, surely, we all want to develop the rules and not, I write the rules and then everyone figures that's the way it's going to be. That doesn't seem to resonate with my idea of community, Now, so I became I am by definition, as my life's progressed, become very process orientated as opposed to objective orientated, because being objective orientated has only given to me losing a lot of hair and getting a lot of bumps on my forehead. So I really try to become process orientated, because I find that usually the destination is nicer than where I thought I was going. And the journey's a hell of a lot easier that way as well. So over to you.
Well, I am very interested in how this, I want to know more about this ruleless, because on one hand you're saying governance, but you haven't really defined governance for us yet, what that even is, and then the rulelessness and how that really plays out in reality in your communities.
Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't mean that we can't have rules. I mean, we do have some rules here. We just decided that we wouldn't have cats and dogs here. Now, that sounds pretty shocking to some people, but the reason for that was that we bought a World Heritage Area here. And the authority managing that through UNESCO prefer that neighbours to the World Heritage don't have dogs and cats. So as a result of not having dogs and cats, we have lots of animals come here, The other day I had a tree kangaroo sleeping in my avocado tree in my garden, And these things obviously wouldn't happen if we had dogs and cats here. So it's not about us not liking dogs and cats, but we choose to come here to live more closely with Mother Earth. And as beautiful as dogs and cats are, they are not always compatible with the place that we're living in. So to get onto this, that we watched what my friend did, and they developed an extensive rule book, and I could see that this was causing them a lot of grief too, that a lot of people just, were saying, okay, well, we don't fit. So it's sort of literally like building a wall around their community to some extent. It was obviously had a lot of benefit in that it made it clearer for the people engaged, literally what they're about. But my real concern, I guess, was that by having a big rule book implied that we were all then policemen. And, I could just see that this is, starting very much from the old world. And I figured that through process, we had to find a means that we could develop our rules. But firstly, we really needed to go back and work out what our core values were.
Your core values. Okay.
Yeah.
And can you share with us what some of those were?
Yeah, well, once again, we had processes. Now, I really benefited from being able to see these other exercises going on and going, well, that's not the way I feel about it. But we had a workshop here about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. And what I try to do is say, okay, let's take a permaculture approach to this challenge, okay? And in permaculture, the boundaries really determine the order within the systems, So I like to look at nature as my guide, as my teacher. If it doesn't fit with the way I see nature operating, then it's probably not sustainable. So in this case, what I was doing was was looking at our boundary issues and seeing if we could identify the order at the boundaries that would create the order within the boundaries, you know. So at the moment I'm looking over at a rainforest. Now the boundary between the rainforest and the pasture is very clear, and there's definitely a different order going on, you know, inside the rainforest as opposed to outside the rainforest, just so people can understand what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
So what we did in this workshop is I said, okay, well, let's start with the boundary of our feet. We are the great pleasure and privilege of walking on Mother Earth, okay? So let's talk about that boundary, that relationship that we all share, okay? Well, as you can imagine, you know, our relationship with Mother Earth, the kind of people we had involved, that was a really easy one, you know? Basically, we all wanted to improve our relationship with Mother, you know? We wanted to be less damaging to her. We wanted to be more receptive of her subtleties. It was easy. It was a lay down misère, okay. And for your audience to give them some idea, it was at about that time that Spirit told me to throw away my shoes. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, I don't wear shoes, or if I do, it's for some peculiar circumstance. And that in itself was an incredible exercise because I had to learn to walk again. And what I mean by that was that when we have boots on or shoes on, we march. And when you take them away, you actually learn how to place your feet on Mother again. So that in itself is an interesting exercise and sort of fits with this community building exercise that we were at, was that, okay, we need to be sensitive and receptive to Mother and learn to be closer and more appreciative of her.
Yes.
Okay, so that was our interface with Mother Earth. I said, okay, that's a pretty easy one. There's a fence over there that actually constitutes our cadastral boundary, the boundary between this community and the so-called world. I like to make sure that we don't confuse the world with Mother Earth. You know, to me, a Western society tends to put some of these things all in the same basket. But for me, I try to make a clear distinction that my understanding of the world is the world of men and women, of humanity, as opposed to Mother Earth. Now, when we look at the boundary over there at the fence, that's a lot more complex boundary to manage, and communities in general struggle with this one, you know. There's obviously a whole stack of different approaches to the boundaries of the community. You know, we see communities such as the Amish, you know, who have very defined boundaries that relate to, you know, their mode of contact and how they relate with the community outside. And I'm not here to judge any of these. I think it's great that we've got so many diverse communities to learn from, to be honest. But, you know, it was pretty clear that our community, being small and in a beautiful place and not such a hostile environment over the fence, certainly didn't want a big wall around our community. We wanted an impervious wall that if we want to go out and engage with the bigger world, we want to encourage people, and we want to equally encourage them to be able to come back and bring their friends, you know. So you can see, Sienna, what we were doing was to start to define these boundaries from a human-centered view of the world, as opposed to how do we tie our rules into the constructs of the political, socio-political system. Okay, that one was more difficult. So when we got down to defining our values about the outside world, it became easier for us to have two categories, you know, to start to identify the things in that outside world that we wanted less of, you know, that we wanted less of in our lives, that we wanted to move away from, to let go of, to forget, hopefully, you know. And there were things over that fence that we could identify that we still wanted to engage in, you know. Local food networks, you know, there are lots of good things out there in the world that we can contribute to, that we felt were still serving our community and the higher purpose of people. So even though it was a much more complex boundary arrangement than through our feet, it helped us to define who we were, and, you know, so we could see other people's responses and get clearer about our shared values, you know, in these domains, you know. Now then there's obviously our relationship with each other, and we talked a lot about this because this is something that community in the West has struggled with as well, in that we don't realize, I mean, you do, but many people don't realize, how alienated we have become over the last several hundred years in the West, not only do we have a fence around our house, our house is full of walls, and, we tend to retreat, to our house or, to our garden and then to our house and then to our room. And these are places where we are locked off from the rest, that are not transparent,
Right.
And in a community, that's not quite the same, Sure, we still have, in this place, our rooms and places we can go where we don't have to engage, but we share the same houses, we share the same gardens. And as such, we share each other more. And the whole point about this boundary between ourselves is that we had to recognize that we have to be family, like those people that share a house or a room or whatever, that we have to be committed to living with each other's beauty and with each other's pain and with each other's challenges, And in doing this, we can often see each other's stuff much more clearly than we can see our own. Yeah. And so that this brought this sense of responsibility that, okay, if you could put up with my shit, I need to be honest with you about yours, Yeah. Now, it's not all bad, obviously, but we really needed to get to this stage to understand that, living in community wasn't like, just living in the suburbs just with a sexier title. There were real opportunities and real challenges that came with them.
Well, yes, because we've lost our even desire for intimacy. It's really at epidemic proportions now. This artificial matrix of separation, along with all of the wounding, and we become the perpetrators of the abusive system. We learn it at an early age, and then we act it out, either as victim or perpetrator. And then we try to dissociate from this huge pain body that we've developed. And then they give us all this archontic technology to get lost within, and all of these places to go hide. And it is less painful. I mean, this is why we like to talk on chat rooms and in forums, and we're used to, they're all walls, they're boundaries separating what is true and authentic, and yet at the very core of anyone that I have ever really worked with intimately as a therapist or psychologist over my life, there is that key issue of intimacy and the desire to be known and to know. And so we are such a humanity in conflict right now. It's just reaching breaking point proportions. And the younger ones are getting programmed into the, having most of their encounters in video cyber salons and this sort of thing. And so then you mentioned community. I came to Ecuador thinking I would make community. And I'm in a beautiful Andean mountain village with people who love permaculture and want to live sustainable realities. And I'm not saying they aren't lovely people, but everyone is at arm's length. And and every community, other than one with sort of nomads up in the mountains, has failed here. And I was scratching my head. How could we all, because many of us have come from all over the world to try to make something different. And it does not even occur to people the level of lone wolfhood we've all just taken on as our default setting, and how suspicious / paranoid we are of each other, not even wanting to wade through the oceans of crap that we have accumulated to even, most people are so burnt out on it, they just are like, wounded animals. They want to isolate in their caves, and yet they like to sit and have, a beer or a conversation and this sort of thing. But I'm not feeling, I feeling like we've even lost the impulse to do what you're saying, to break through these barriers in some way and come together to fulfill our deepest impulse. It's very tragic to me. And I'm fascinated by anyone that has taken even baby steps in this direction. Well, you've taken far more than baby steps, but I'm very interested to know how these things unfolded in your reality, because I know that you have a lot to do with facilitation and communication, and you've been deep in these processes. So, because I truly believe in my heart of hearts that community is solution, that human intimacy needs to reinvent itself, that organically we are going to find great joy and fulfillment and safety and comfort and support with one another. But it's probably one of the most arduous roads from where we've been programmed to be. So anyway, I'm ranting off here, and I still want to understand this governance word.
Okay, so I think that you can see how interesting that exercise was, and it worked really well, I thought. This notion of using nature as a means to find a process to step forward was really what I was trying to do.
Okay.
In that exercise, and it was really good because it was new to us all. So we learned, we got some insights out of that exercise, but and we revisited this sort of process over the period. But it sort of got us down to, well, and me in particular, to thinking about what is the glue, and our discussions across these three different communities, it became quite clear to us that we needed glue, because everywhere we looked out there in the bigger world, the experience of community was, as you said, was failure generally. There are successful communities, of course, but mostly they seem to be ones that either have a very tight construct in terms of rules, let's say like an Amish community that have been going for a long period of time and got tradition and got tight modus operandi, or they are in Australia communities that have a very strong leadership base, that provides enough strength and support at the middle of it that it holds the raft together, while people come and go and those that really fit coalesce as such. And I use that term raft again because I'm always looking for analogies to help us explain what it is that we're doing. And the raft is a classic one because, literally it represents this group of people that have come together, maybe on a desert island because we realize that we are aliens from that world over the fence, and in fact, what we're really trying to do is find the lashings that will hold these individuals together in a shared construct that will then take us over the ocean or to that metaphoric place that we're searching for. So in our meetings, we talked a lot about glue, and I'm very clear that community doesn't just require good people; it requires more than good people. I mean, we've had good people here, and the community has, I won't use the word failed, but fallen apart, is disassociated. And let's think of this as like the tide. We have to have this ability for people to come and grow and then finish and go, So we don't see that as failure per se, but obviously, it seems disappointing when we're making progress and then, it's clear that we don't have enough of it to keep it sustainable. But the main thing for me is to make sure that we learn out of each of these exercises, how we can fine-tune the model, as you would say, and hopefully through radio programs like this, share what we've done and, hopefully then find a tidbit from someone else that will make a difference. So I am really exploring this whole notion of what the glue is, okay? So the glue is obviously partly the bad smell in the air out there. There's something driving people to look for community. So that's part of the glue, this search. But obviously this part of the glue doesn't necessarily last as long, So you've got this additive to the glue that's very useful early on while the novelty's high. But there needs to be more than that. There needs to be something that keeps people in community. So there's got to be some sense that there's something they are learning or growing in the community, and that they feel they're making progress towards. And I think that that was really helped by our petal. So we knew what it was that we were doing, and that we weren't confused about where the boundaries were in terms of what defined our community. But, then we realized is that, with our grumble pie, that that conflict is a natural part of living. And it's a very important part of living. When we look at the rainforest, we have cyclones and they smash a lot of the trees and it looks terrible, but in fact, that's how the rainforest operates. It gives opportunity, new trees come up, and in fact, that's what the system requires. If we don't have conflict, we don't evolve. So what we really had to do is work out how within this glue we've got our conflict resolution processes, because they're essential. Because if there's conflict, it means that there's something we can improve on. We should see this as a blessing. The real question is, do we have the processes that can stop the water from coming over the side of the boat, And the grumble pie was a nice, what I call a low order conflict resolution process. But it doesn't necessarily deal with serious conflict. And, spent a lot of time looking at what we mean by the different types of conflict. Often you'll see that the conflict arrives out of personality differences, We saw that some people generally in the community got on well with some people and not with others, and that it wasn't a common line, it had to do with the personality. So obviously as a community, we can collectively learn how to deal with, personality clashes and be mindful of them, which is healthy, We need to be mindful whether the conflict is coming from an egoic point of view or a lack of comprehension point of view. These are all part of our conflict tick checks to go down to get to the bottom of it, And believe it or not, there can be totally legitimate conflict. And I think this really has to be understood. That conflict is in our lexicon deemed as a bad word. In fact, it's very important. We need ultimately to be able to agree to disagree. And I guess that's sort of the objective where I'm trying to go in terms of governance, If on one level we say we want to build a resilient, community, but resilient both in terms of landscape and in terms of social structures, then we need to embrace conflict because it will help us to build resilience, Homogeneous thinking is not resilient, New idea and talent, the whole thing falls over. So by definition,
actually, we are out of our first hour here. I know it goes so fast, Bood. Thank you so much. How do people get hold of you?
They can email me.
All right. Can you give that out?
Yeah, it's Bood, BOOD, at tpg.com.au.
Beautiful.